Hey guys, we made this nice Slack layout in the last video, and now we want to add actual data from our server in here instead of just static stuff. So what we're going to do is add a GraphQL query that will access our server and then our database and put in the data here. So what we're going to be doing is creating that query now. I'm going to group these guys into like a sidebar component, and we're going to grab the data and feed it into these two components. So first we're going to start with the server stuff and add the query that we want to run. But before I jump into that, I wanted to address real quick, there's a SQLized depreciated little message I'm getting. You can get rid of that by adding operator aliases SQLized.op here and just the constructor of the SQLized object. And if we come down to the bottom, we no longer get the depreciation warning. So if that was bugging you, you can get rid of it that way. Okay, so done with that. Now we want to start with our type query. So this is our team schema, and we're going to create a all teams query, which returns an array of teams. So we have our team object here, and from our teams we would like to select the channels and get all the channels for the teams. Now I'm not sure how we're going to do this users quite yet, so we're going to right now just fetch these guys. And then username I'm going to add to the JWT token, which we'll see in a second. Okay, so for our query we have all teams. We're returning an array of teams. Let's create the resolver for that. So I'm going to create a query type. And we're just going to copy this because it's basically the same thing, but not really. Here we're going to say all teams to match our schema. We're going to keep the requires off because we would like to prevent users that are not logged in to get the teams. Now notice I'm not passing in a user ID here. Same thing, we want to get the user from the context. So instead of all this junk, we don't need it. We're just going to fetch the team. So models.team.findAll, and here we are going to grab the owner where that's the ID, and we're just going to make this a raw query so we don't fetch extra junk we don't need, and put a comma there. There we go. Is that good? Looks like we're getting a little red line, not sure why. Did I not have... All this looks good, except, oh, I see why. I need an extra quote mark here. Here we go. Or parentheses. So now we're going to fetch all the teams where the user ID is the owner, which we're getting from the context. So our query is going to look something like this. Oh, we need to just refresh real quick. There we go. All teams. And then from here we're going to select the ID of the team, which, oh, we don't have that. So come back over here. We're going to say ID, which is going to be an int. Because we want to use the ID to reference the team in different ways. So we're going to give a quick refresh. We want the ID. We don't care so much about the owner. Is there anything else we want? We want channels. We also want the names so we can display it. Oh, do I not have name? Nope. Name, which is a string. I just forgot to put the attributes for the team here. So we're grabbing the name, and then we don't care about owner or members quite yet, but we care about channels. So refresh, name is there, and our channels, we're going to get an ID, well, there's public, a name, and that's pretty much all we care about. Well, actually we need to know its members too. We actually don't care if we do care. I was going to say we need to think of a nice cool way. We'll worry about this later. But what we want to do is think of a nice cool way to select the channel's members only if the channel is private. Maybe we'll do some kind of query later. We'll do something fancy with it. That'll come up soon. But right now this query does not work. And the reason for that is we're doing find all on teams, and teams doesn't just give us channels by default. So there's a couple ways we can handle this. We could just fetch channels by default in our thing here. So the way you do that in SQLize is you say you want to include the channel model, and it'll automatically make a query for you. But for us, we don't want to fetch it every time, because what if I want to get the teams but I don't care about the channels, right? I don't want to fetch the channels every time and waste my query. So the way you get around that, one way, and this is not the ideal way, so I'm going to show you the wrong way, and then we're going to go over how you can improve this. So here's the team. Notice how I'm matching up the type name here with this. So we want to override the default, how you resolve the channel. So here I'm going to say channels, and we're going to have a little function here. So basically this is going to take some information like a regular resolver and return how we should resolve this field of that type. So we're going to say parent args models user. So we do not have any args for this guy. Our parent object is actually going to be a team object. So you only really use the parent if you're using like a child property like this. So we're going to have an ID, a name, an owner, members to look at. So here I can say parent, and I can actually, if I want to, I can say the ID, which is all we really care about, because now I can say models dot find all, and I can find all dot channel. Oops. So if we come to the channel over here, we can fetch all of them that have a team ID, right, equal to this ID here. So I can say team ID is equal to ID to fetch the ID that we want. And we don't care about this user object. So this is a nice, easy way to do it. But it is not the best way. And I'll explain that why when we actually make the query, because it'll make a lot of sense. So when we actually execute the query, you'll understand. So we have this little guide, and what we want to do is we want to run this query right here and feed the data into these components. So right now I have what I call dumb components, which is in my components folder. I'm going to create a new folder called containers. This is going to be where I put the smart components. I'm going to call this sidebar. And these guys, what they do is they have your logic, your state, and they feed it into the dumb components. And the reason for this is you don't muddy your logic and your view. So this is just a nice way to organize things. Now, one quick note about the file structure. I'm splitting things up by what they are. So routes, containers, components, and let me lowercase this. But ideally in a larger application, it's better to group things by context. And what I mean by that is view team uses sidebar and all of these components. So it's better to make like a view team folder and put everything in here so you know what goes with what. Because right now we could think the register uses some of these components when it really doesn't. But anyway, let's create this sidebar component. So React from React, and really it does not going to take any props from our view team, at least not for now. We might take some later, but we're not sure yet. So I'm going to say class sidebar. I'm making this a class because I expect it to have some kind of state. React dot component, and the state is really just the current team, right? And I'm going to say the current team is 0, team 0. So we could say this is an ID, or we could say this is an index. I think it makes sense to make it an ID. This is something we'll probably change later, but I just want to have a state in there for now. And actually, you know what? I'm thinking for our little guy that this will actually be more tied to the URL than through the props. So, change my mind. We're not going to have the state here. We're going to pass the state of this in. So instead, I'm going to make this just a sidebar. We're not going to have any state for this. This guy is just going to be making GraphQL query. So I'm going to import GQL and GraphQL. That way we can do GraphQL stuff from React Apollo. And we're going to export default sidebar, and we're going to wrap it with a GraphQL higher order component. And here's where we're going to make our const all teams query. And then in this, we're going to just copy over the query we made. And then we're going to say, oops, we're going to say all teams query. And then in here, we are now going to have a data component or data prop passed into us. And here we're going to have all teams. And we're also going to have a loading. And while we're loading, I'm just going to render false or render null. So loading, we'll put no, otherwise we'll render our component. Alright, so now we have our all teams. We can render our two components here. So I'm going to copy this. This is going to be a teams and a channel component. And we are going to render them over here now. So I'm going to delete them from our view team, put them here. And now instead, I'm going to copy this and say sidebar components, now containers. And I'm going to render a sidebar. And to my sidebar, I think I will say current team, and we'll say ID is equal to 1. This is hard coded, but we'll change that later. Doesn't like it. It goes up 1 container / sidebar. That looks good. I think I probably just need to save this guy. So here we're going to render teams and channels. So now you're able to actually return an array in React 16. So what we can do is we can actually just pass an array just like this. Oops, there we go. The only thing is when you pass an array of components now, you need to pass in keys. So I'm going to say sidebar, team sidebar. Wow, this has just started lagging super hard. Okay, and then also the key for this is going to be channels sidebar. And now here is our all teams. So for this, I'm going to map it in here. And I'm going to say all teams dot map. And we'll notice what we want to feed into this is an ID and not the name, but the first letter. So what we're going to do is we're going to say for every team, and we're going to return an object, and we're going to say we want the ID from the team, which is t.id, and then the letter is going to be equal to t.name.charat character 0, and we're going to say to uppercase. That way it's capitalized. So you notice how I'm putting all the logic here. That's how container components are supposed to work. And then really just this is going to be what it looks like, our team component. Okay. And so here we're going to grab our channels and put them in. There's nothing I really have to do here special. I'm just saying t.channels or all teams. And here we actually need to find the current team, right? So passed as a prop is current team ID. And I'm going to use Lodash to help us here. I don't know if I have installed Lodash. Nope, I haven't installed Lodash for this yet. So here I am. I'm on the Slack clone server, so I'm going to pop on over to the client and say yarn add Lodash. And here, instead of returning a just the component, we're going to like compute something first. So put this up here. We're going to say if loading, then return null. Otherwise, we do our regular return here. And we need to get rid of that. There we go. So now we're doing our same thing, but up here I want to compute basically the current team that's open. So to do this, we're going to find the index. So we're going to say team idx is equal to Lodash we could find, so Lodash has a find index. So what this will do is it'll give us the index of the team that we want. Or we could just do a for loop. There's tons of different ways to do this. We're going to say our array is this guy, all teams. And then what we can do is we can pass an array. And the first value is, I believe the first value is what you want to look at. So the property I want to look at is the ID, and we're going to compare it against the current team ID. So what it's going to do is it's going to find the index of this array where the ID is equal to the current team ID. And now we can just say all teams team IDX. So now we have the current team that we want. So now down here in channels, instead of all teams, you can say team dot channels and just pass that in. Team name, this is just going to be team.name. And for a username, this is where I want to actually grab from the JWT token. So I'm going to say local storage dot get item. I'm going to get a, I'm going to get the regular token, and I actually need to decode this, so I'm going to import decode from our JWT decode, and we're actually going to have to put it up here, const, we'll put a try catch, so we're going to say let username is equal to an empty string, and we'll pass the, I was thinking I could just use the local storage here, but we're not going to be able to, so pass the username in. I'm going to do a try catch, and we don't care if we error out, we'll just keep the username as an empty string. And so here we're going to say const token is equal to local storage dot get item token, and then here we're going to say decode token, and then back we should be able to get a user, and from our user we should be able to get a username. And I'm not going to decode the username because we need to set that. This is equal to user.username. Now you may be wondering, oh, that should be a let. It auto changed that for me. Object destructuring. So I think it wants me to do this, but then I also get an ESLint warning about it here saying it doesn't like it. So I'm just going to say ESLint disable next line, prefer object disabling, disable next line. That way we don't have to see that error. Alright. And now you may be wondering, but Ben, we're not saving the username in the token. Well, we can. So we just need to change our auth over here. In our token, we're only saving the ID. Oops, so now what we can do is also grab the username. Easy as that. So now we're passing in, we can look at what we're doing. We're passing in our username, our team name, our channels to our component. So pretty interesting. So let's see this in action, see if we have any errors. I'm going to first check our server. Server looks like it's doing okay. And let's come over here to the browser. Okay, dang, so we have a lot of teams for this user. You notice how the first name is not popping up here. We do see my first team, which I believe is correct. But I'm just going to re-log in. I actually have no idea who I'm logged in as right now. And I actually forgot the users. I think this guy. I can just copy the username. Oops, I need to log in. And the reason why I need to log in again is because we changed what values we're storing in the JWT token. So we need to give them a new one. So cool, now we see our username, which I just jambled. And now we see our different teams getting fetched, which we see more than one. So what I can do is I can inspect this, and I can just make sure we're getting the right values for this, as we would expect. So I'm using the Apollo Dev Tools, which if you haven't heard of it, are really nice. I'll put a link in the description below. What it allows you to do is see different queries that are run it doesn't look like it worked right now. And it's blank. What it's supposed to do though is when I run this, it's supposed to see if I run any GraphQL queries, and I can see what the values and stuff are of them, which is really handy for this sort of thing. So here, queries, one, here we go. So here's our sidebar query, we can see it. So notice how it tells us what we run. We can run it in graphical if we want to get the different values. We're not going to do that, but we can see what the output of it was. So we can see my first team, that's why we have an M here, my first. At the very bottom, what do we have? The name is ADF. We have an A here, so that all looks good. You'll notice I have one channel for all these guys called #C1. I don't know how that got there. That seems like an error. You'll notice we don't have a general channel either. So that's something we need to add. But I think this is good for this video. We just did a lot of stuff. We'll continue that in the next video, pulling the data and working on our sidebar container. There's a lot of different things we need to do with it. One of them is to actually pull in, well, we need to be able to create channels too so we can add them, but actually this channel here, there should be a general channel here as well. So we need to actually create the general channel every time we create a team and some different stuff. So that's it for this video, guys. Thanks for watching. As always, the code is up on GitHub if you want to check it out.